Welcome to the Living While Loving Your Child Through Addiction podcast. Here, we focus on self care as we tend to our own lives while also extending love and compassion to our kids. This podcast offers science backed skills to bring hope and healing to your entire family. Hi, everybody. It has been what feels like forever since I've done a solo episode. And it's just really good to be here with you doing this episode today because, as much as I love doing interviews, these episodes feel like a chance to directly connect with you. And when I'm doing an interview, I'm thinking about you and what kind of interview is going to be most helpful, but I'm focused on collaborating with the person that I'm interviewing. So it just feels different and it feels good to be back doing a solo episode because I think it's been a couple of months. So I'm doing this episode today because when I hear something in multiple ways, I feel like the universe is sending me a message. And recently, several times in a row, a mom either asked me if I still had a group coaching program or if I had thought about starting one. And then after hearing that several times, I realized that I have not talked about my group at all this year. And yes, I do have a group called the Peaceful Mom Group. And if you don't know that that group exists, then you cannot receive the support that it offers. And that's why it exists, is to support moms. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about why having that group support matters. I'm going to share why identity work is a non negotiable when your child is using substances and what it actually takes in order to be a peaceful mom. Not just intellectually, but embodying it when you feel like a peaceful mom in your bones. And I'm also going to share a little bit about my Peaceful Mom group so you understand how it can support you. And this is where I would insert a drum roll if I had any idea how to do that. But I am going to be offering 2 free group coaching calls before Christmas. So I'm going to tell you more about that too. But first, I want to talk about what identity is, how your identity gets injured. Yes, an injured identity is actually a term. And why we need identity level healing if we've been living in survival mode. So, for the sake of this podcast, I'm going to really simplify identity and think of it as your story about your roles in life. Your identity is your internal dialogue. So think of it as a collection of things like beliefs that you hold about yourself and your place in the world, roles you see yourself in, and what those roles mean, the meaning that you assign to motherhood and other life experiences, what you make that mean about you. Basically, identity is the sentences in your brain about yourself that you just repeat over and over again. That is also how beliefs are created. Beliefs are just thoughts that we think over and over again until we program them into our brain. And again, your identity is just a collection of beliefs about yourself. When we do something over and over again, like repeat a thought or a series of thoughts, our brains physically change. That means our recurring thought patterns strengthen those neural pathways. So the more a thought is repeated, the more ingrained and automated that pathway becomes. And that solidifies those thoughts into a belief. And when we're parenting a child struggling with substances or their mental health, and we're operating from a place of fear based thoughts and actions, that changes our brains and our identity. It changes how we think about ourselves. It changes how we think about our kids, and it changes how we see the world. And of course, it's having this level of impact. This is an experience that impacts every area of your life. And it feels like your child's life is at stake. And in some cases, it is. All of that fear activates your amygdala. Your nervous system starts constantly scanning for threats, and it starts to see threats everywhere because we're really good at finding what we're looking for. Your thoughts and your focus start to narrow to where there is only room to focus on how to fix the danger. Nothing else matters. That's why it's so easy to shift into that survival identity. And you start thinking things like, I'm responsible for saving them. I'm the only person that can do it. I have to do it. I can't relax until they're safe. If I don't do something right this second, something terrible is going to happen. So then that leads to constantly checking your phone, their phone, searching their bedroom, monitoring their location and their bank account and anything else you have access to monitor, arguing, crying, begging, fixing, controlling, rescuing, freezing, withdrawing, all of the things. And it's so easy to get caught up in this vicious cycle. And that's where that identity injury comes in. Neurologically, your amygdala becomes overactive and your sense of self begins to fragment. When I was there, my identity fragmented and narrowed down to all it was I'm the mom of a child with an addiction who is hell-bent on self-destruction. That was my focus and identity. That was my outlook on both of our lives. My identity was so wrapped up in that when somebody asked me how I was, I just talked about my daughter Helena and what was going on with her and how she was doing. I was just a mom trying to save my daughter's life. And that sounds really noble, right? Of course, I wanted to save my daughter's life. Anybody would agree with me and say, oh, yeah, of course, any mother would do that. But trying to save my daughter became my entire identity because it was all that I thought about. But that was not sustainable. And it was obvious that my nervous system was in crisis because my hair was falling out and breaking off. I was gaining weight. I was sick all of the time. I had bronchitis for months. I couldn't get rid of it. And then it turned into pneumonia. Like every cell of my body was bracing for impact all day, every day. And I was even in physical pain. Like I didn't even know who I was anymore. I was confused. I didn't trust myself. And life as I knew it had completely changed. And this experience, as I'm like reliving this, as I'm sharing it, it makes me think of what it's like to live through a tornado. I used to live in Oklahoma and in this area called Tornado Alley. So I've experienced a lot of tornadoes. And if you've ever driven through an area after a big tornado went through there, you know that the landscape looks completely different. It's unrecognizable. It's really confusing because your brain is trying to map it based on what it knew before the tornado. And it's disorienting. It's devastating to see the destruction. And that is what it felt like when I was in the middle of the worst times with Helena. Everything about my life as I knew it had changed, and I felt disoriented and devastated, and I didn't know where to turn or what to do next. One minute, my biggest problem in life is keeping up with her competition cheer schedule. And the next minute, my daughter's using every substance that she can possibly get her hands on and using them all at the same time and overdosing, struggling with suicidal ideation, disordered eating, self harm. Like it was devastating and terrifying. And the more scared that I got, the smaller Helena and I got. Like I couldn't map either of our identities any longer. There was less room for who she really was. And there was less room for who I was because the chaos and the crisis that we were living in were taking up all of the room. I had started to see Helena just as a list of labels, symptoms, and behaviors rather than this whole big hearted, hilarious, talented, complex, beautiful person that she still was inside. It wasn't that I loved her any less, but when fear narrowed my perspective and it was all I focused on, and I was terrified all the time, my brain just collapsed her identity down to one thing, and that was a scary problem to be fixed. And that didn't feel good to either of us. And as I started healing and rebuilding my own identity, I realized I also had to rebuild who my daughter Helena was in my mind. I had to remember that she was more than her substance use, that she was more than the pain she was in, and she was more than the moments that she had hurt me. And it's so easy for us to get stuck in that place where you know something has to change. I knew I needed to change, but I had no idea where to start. And I felt too overwhelmed to use any energy for it. Like I was exhausted by the idea of change and also desperately wanted it at the same time. I wanted to show up differently, but my nervous system was shot and I'm constantly defaulting to being reactive instead of being able to respond intentionally. And what I eventually found was that change is a very active, involved process. So instead of letting my brain continue on with my autopilot thoughts and actions of survival, fear, and hypervigilance, I had to give my brain intentional new thoughts to think. Ones that supported the mom that I wanted to be. I got support from a coach and joined a group, and I joined several groups actually. And I put a lot of work into figuring out how to remind myself daily of who I wanted to be and what thoughts, feelings, and actions would get me there. I also had to stop resisting where we were and give up that idea of going back to where we were before. I mean, I longed for that life before all of these things happened, before this really living hell of a nightmare started. But it's impossible to go back there. And you think about what I talked about earlier with the area that's been destroyed by a tornado, that experience demands that something new be created. So I started accepting that I needed to create something new and I needed to integrate that whole experience into my identity. That was a huge part of my healing and rebuilding process. And I did the same thing when it came to Helana's identity, my identity for her. I got very intentional with making sure that my thoughts, feelings, and actions served her and the relationship that I wanted to have with her. And that is how you start to heal your identity and go from a mom living in crisis to a peaceful mom. Identity shifts happen, not just from wanting it, but from repetition of new thoughts, new behaviors. And of course, having a regulated nervous system. That is how you create that new normal and integrate this experience. And I'm not sure why this is, but I used to do this as well. But for some reason, we tend to think that information comes from passively consuming or that change comes from passively consuming new information. But there is a huge gap, the size of the Grand Canyon, between consuming information and applying that as knowledge and new actions in your life. And when I start working with parents, I find that they're full of information. They're actually so overloaded with it. And this information has not been digested or implemented. So it's actually backfiring and it's creating more overwhelm and confusion instead of helping. So, in order to create change of your identity or anything else, you have to practice turning that information into action. And it takes guidance to do that. And it takes repetition of learning these skills and practicing them until they become second nature because you have rewired your brain. And you have to be immersed in the subject matter. And that happens in a community of people who are also immersed in the subject matter. Like me being a part of a group of people who are working on themselves the same way that I was is what kept me motivated and helped me repair my relationship with Helena when doing that work got harder when I felt like it wasn't working. But the more often you experience feeling calm and connected, and you feel supported by a community like we have in the Peaceful Mom group, the more your nervous system learns, like, oh, this feels pretty good. I think that we can start to relax a little bit now. I mean, listening to podcasts is great. It gives you new information and ideas, but being immersed in the work with support, surrounded by others who are living it, that is where transformation happens. And we don't become great at anything just by dabbling in it. Professional athletes don't train once a month. They live they live that life. They're committed to being great. So they practice over and over and they do it with the support of coaches and other helping professionals because they know they can't do it alone. And that's another idea I don't quite understand is that we think we have to figure everything out alone. And to me, it's particularly interesting that we default to that because we're hardwired for community and connection. Our brains are not set up to handle all this fear and heartbreak that we go through with a child's substance use without support. Trying to handle this alone goes against everything that we know about how people heal and grow and learn to function in stressful situations because we are hardwired for co regulation, connection, and guidance. Our brains actually perceive the world as safer and perceive tasks as easier when we have supportive connection. So there are studies that show it's easier to walk up a hill with a friend than it is to walk up a hill alone. And our ancestors survived by sharing knowledge and cooperating with each other. So it's ingrained in us to seek information and guidance from community. And that's why it's such a healing and powerful experience to be a part of a group like the Peaceful Mom community. It brings together all of these aspects that humans have leaned on for survival since the beginning of time. I named the group the Peaceful Mom Community because when I ask moms what their goals are, one of the goals that they have, one of the most often, and one that they can actually control, is peace. When you identify as a peaceful mom, your brain immediately begins to practice the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that match that peaceful mom identity. But we need help to stay motivated. We need help to continue practicing while we're rewiring our brain. Everybody's motivation ebbs and flows naturally. That's just part of being human. And because of that, it's not reliable to just lean on motivation alone. Because when your motivation starts to fade, so does your hope. So if something stressful happens, and there's a lot of stressful situations happening if your child's struggling with substance use, it's easy to start thinking like, it's not working. I knew that this wasn't going to help. And then you're completely frustrated. You quit for a while and you wait until you've rested enough or something makes you motivated again or gives you a little bit of hope. And then you pick it back up again. But if you're part of a group and your motivation starts to fade and you come to a call and you raise your hand and get coached, and we step back and look at the picture with a wider lens, you start to notice facts instead of these stories that your brain is telling you that not everything is falling apart, that there actually are things that are going well, that you have made some progress, that there is another way of looking at this situation. And we talk through steps to move forward. And just like that, your hope and your motivation have returned, and you don't have to quit and lose all your momentum. Or maybe you come to a call and you don't feel like getting coached and you just listen and you hear another mom working through something, and suddenly you're like, oh, yeah, that's me. Like, I really needed to hear that. Or she says something that inspires you, and you get that clarity, and your motivation comes back. Your nervous system feels regulated after being around the group and feeling supported. And now you're motivated. You don't have to quit. And it feels like magic, but it's not. It's just that we don't change in isolation, we change in community. And you don't just get support from me, you get support from witnessing what's happening with the other group members. Their wins inspire and motivate you. Their progress becomes evidence to you that change is possible. And there's something really powerful about being in a room where what you're going through doesn't shock anybody, where you don't have to pretend that you are okay when you're not. You can just show up as yourself. So when I was thinking about creating the Peaceful Mom group and what the format would look like, I spent a lot of time thinking about why I was able to make such drastic changes in my life and in my relationship with my daughter, Helena, and what I've seen as I've watched other parents changed. And it was really clear to me that it wasn't just one class or one insight or just one moment of motivation, that there's three things that have to come together: nervous system regulation, skills, and real support while you're learning to use those skills. And what I see is that most moms have maybe one of those things. So they struggle to make real changes, which is completely deflating and it makes you feel hopeless. So you might have information from books and podcasts or, other things that you've heard, and or maybe you have support, you go to a group where you feel heard and understood, but you don't really walk away with any tools or change. Or maybe you learn new skills, but your nervous system is so dysregulated that you can't use those skills in the heat of the moment. So the Peaceful Mom group brings all three of those things together. You get the nervous system regulation, the craft based skills, and the live coaching in community. On the nervous system regulation calls, they're meant to calm your body so you can think, so that you can speak intentionally and choose intentionally. And when you're calm, panic and fear stop running your life. And this piece is critical because when you're regulated, your parenting just automatically changes. It's so much easier. And you also become these three things that your son or daughter really desperately needs from you. And that is consistent, predictable, and safe. When we're regulated, we're consistent, predictable, and safe. On the craft based skills calls, we learn things like effective communication tools, boundaries based on your values and what you're in control of, how to motivate change and positively reinforce behaviors you want to see more of, and how to self coach when you're not on a call. So you finally know what to do instead of just constantly guessing or reacting or helplessly waiting for your child to change so that you can feel better. And on the live group coaching calls, you get community. You're supported while you're implementing and integrating what you've learned. You're getting help based on your situation. So you get to practice these skills, ask questions, walk through these situations, like those days when you feel like nothing is working, and you can come and get support from me and the rest of the group. You don't just consume information, you take action from it. And that's how you shift and you grow. And your child actually starts to see the difference because you're calm. Your conversations are different, they're more productive. They're more kind and compassionate and collaborative. And you start to see your connection growing. Your child feels emotionally safer with you. And even if they're still struggling, this is how you become a peaceful mom. So, if you want to experience what the Peaceful Mom Group is like before you sign up for it, you get to check it out because I am offering 2 free group coaching calls. People ask me all the time if they can try out the group before they join it, but I really protect that space and everybody in it, and I think it's a very sacred space for members only. And this is the first time that I have offered this opportunity to try on these 2 group coaching calls. It's as close as you're gonna get to being in the group without being in it. So the first one I'm gonna do on Friday, December 19th, and the next one I'm gonna do on Monday, December 22nd, so you can come and get coaching to help you prepare for Christmas. You can sign up for these free calls on my website, heatherrosscoaching.com. And there is also going to be a link to sign up in the episode show notes. And again, I've never offered this before, so I'm really excited to share it with you. And I hope that I get to see you on at least one or come to both calls. So, thank you for listening to this podcast today. If you found this episode helpful, I would love for you to take a moment to leave a 5-star review. Those reviews help other parents to decide that this podcast is worth their time giving it a listen. Until next time, remember that taking care of yourself is not a luxury, it is a necessity because you matter too.